Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sherrie, and my Dharma name is Xianxing, and I'm one of the junior Dharma teachers here at MAPA. This spring, the junior Dharma teachers were asked to give talks based on topics within a book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. And this book is very dear to me because it's one of the first Dharma books I ever bought more than 20 years ago. I had done mindfulness and meditation for a while, and that book really introduced me to the Buddha's teaching. What I had been through before was sort of secular, me-centered mindfulness and meditation that we see a lot. So this was the first introduction I had to the actual teaching of the Buddha. So what I'm going to talk about today is the Four Immeasurable Minds, which is chapter 24 in the book. Thich Nhat Hanh also wrote another book which is based on chapter 24 called Teachings on Love, which goes into the Four Immeasurables in more depth, if you're interested in reading more about them. First I'm going to talk about what they are, and then I'm going to talk about how they play out in our life. So what are they? Well, they're called the Four Immeasurables. They're also called the Brahma Viharas. They are love, or loving kindness, which is wishing others to be happy and have the causes of happiness. They are compassion, which is wishing others to be from suffering and the causes of suffering. They are an altruistic joy, or mudita, which is sharing in the joy of others, not suffering when you see someone else get something good because you don't have it. You feel their happiness when they're happy. And the fourth one is equanimity, which is a balanced mind that is not altered by things like craving, hatred, and ignorance. Now, Brahma Vihara means residence of Brahma, or dwelling place of Brahma. And if you know anything about Hinduism, you know Brahma is a god. So what's a god doing in the Buddhist teaching? Well, when people came to the Buddha to ask him questions, they often came from various backgrounds. Some were Hindu, some were Jain, some had other backgrounds. And when he talked to them, he would use terms with which they were familiar so that they would understand what he was talking about. He wasn't the kind of person who would use words that you weren't familiar with that would confuse you. So he was a good teacher. So when someone who was Hindu or Jain came and asked him a question, a Hindu asked him a question about how do I get to the Brahma heavens? And he said, well, you get there by practicing these four things: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And if you do that, you'll be reborn in heaven, as you wish. So that's why they're called the Brahma Viharas. Now, you can work with these in two ways. One way you've done before if you've come to MAPA before. One way is to do a meditation practice with them. And when we do the chanting and we do the loving kindness meditation, may I be happy, may I be well, and then you extend that out to others, that's a meditation practice on the first Brahma Vihara, which is loving kindness or metta. And you can do that kind of meditation practice on each of them, wishing others to be free from suffering, and then starting with yourself and then extending it out to others, just as we do with love. And then you do it also with joy and with equanimity. You can work with these in this meditative way and take them all the way through full concentration or samadhi in the four jhanas. But we don't just work with the Brahma Viharas in meditation, we work with them in our everyday life. They can become the way we deal with life. What are they in detail? Metta, or loving kindness, is the first one. Like I said, this is wanting everyone to have happiness and the causes of happiness. But Thich Nhat Hanh, in his book, points out that this isn't just being kind or nice, it's really love. So he likes to call it love rather than loving kindness. And we also read the Metta Sutta when we chant. And there's a line in there about how metta is like the love of a mother who will give up her life for her child, her only child. In some versions of the Metta Sutta it says, Metta is like the love of a mother for her child, her only child. And obviously if you're going to give up your life for someone, that's more than being nice. Being nice is holding the door for someone when they're coming behind you. But if you're willing to give your life up for someone, that's a very deep love. So Thich Nhat Hanh likes to call it love. He's rather upset that when we hear the word love, we think of things like, I love hamburgers. He thinks we should get love back to its more pure meaning of being kind and generous and caring about someone. So Stacy gave a good talk about metta last week, so I can move on to the next one, which is compassion. And compassion is wanting others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. I'll come back to suffering in a little bit, because that's going to be the main focus of the second part of my talk. Sympathetic joy or altruistic joy is the third Brahma-vihara. This is feeling joy rather than jealousy when someone else has something good happen. We share in the happiness of others as if it were our own. Equanimity is a balanced mind that's unshaken by hope and fear. Sometimes when people talk about equanimity, they get the idea that it means maybe indifference. And it doesn't mean indifference. It's just a mind that's not ruled by hopes and fears about myself. So when we start thinking, I want, I hope, I fear, I failed, I succeeded, he has something and I don't, that can make our mind kind of upset, and we don't do the kind of things that we think we should do. Maybe we do the kind of things that our emotions and our feelings lead us to. So if we have equanimity, our mind isn't disturbed by all these little things that arise, like our hopes and our fears. Without equanimity, it's actually pretty hard to put the first three Brahma-viharas into place, right? If you don't have equanimity, if your mind is burning up with jealousy, for instance, you're going to have trouble feeling any compassion for someone when something bad happens to somebody who had it really good when you didn't. Sometimes people have a lot of trouble feeling compassion for people in that kind of situation. If you're totally indifferent to someone, how could you love them enough to give up your life for them? Sometimes we won't even hold the door open for someone if we're indifferent for them. So while equanimity is the fourth one, it's really a very important one. All four of them work together, and they aid and strengthen each other. If you love someone, you feel more compassion for them. If you love someone, you feel more joy for them. If you have compassion for someone when there's difficulty, it's easier to share in their joy when something good happens to them. What makes the four immeasurable minds immeasurable? Well, it's that we overcome boundaries. Sometimes they're called the boundless minds because they have no boundaries. When we do the metta practice in the chanting, we start off with ourselves, and then we expand it out a little bit to people that we really like. We expand it out to people that we don't like so much, but they're okay. And then we expand our love out to people that maybe we don't care about that much. And then we try to expand it out to those people that we really hate. And what we're doing is extending the boundaries of our loving kindness from just me and just the ones I like because they're mine, out to everybody. And this helps us to make our love boundless or immeasurable because it's not bounded by me and what I want, what I like. It's open for everybody. When we stop trying to separate mine from yours, we can really feel love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. In fact, Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't like calling joy altruistic joy or sympathetic joy because he feels that automatically defines it as me feeling joy for you. So he'd like to leave that word altruistic off because he feels like it has a subtle reinforcement of the line of me and you. So he likes to just call it joy. But most teachers use the word altruistic joy so that we know that it's not just being happy about me. It's happiness for others as well. When love, compassion, joy, and equanimity are not boundless, when they're bounded by these self-views, bounded by me, they turn into what are called the enemies of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. For instance, if you threaten what I love, I may hate you. This is the opposite of love. Hate or ill will is the direct enemy of love. But you can see that it's based somewhat in a love that is selfish. If someone didn't threaten something that was mine, why would I even hate them? When we have ill will arise to someone, it's because we feel they threaten something that is dear to us, whether it's my house, my car, my belongings, my country, my religion, my nationality, whatever it is. When we have ill will or hatred to someone, it's arising from a love that is not an immeasurable love. It's a love that is selfish and me-centered. You know, if I love my friends and my things, my car, my country, I may cling to them. Clinging is the near enemy of love. It's closer to love, it's not so much the opposite of love. But it's still not real love, because that clinging to my things can actually lead to that hatred or ill will. If you see someone is threatening your things, then you aren't going to feel love for them. The direct enemy of compassion is cruelty. I think that's pretty easy to see. But again, it's going to arise out of some kind of selfishness. For instance, not helping someone when we see them stranded at the side of the road. It's because they're not connected to us, so we're not feeling compassion for them. Or maybe we think that if I stop to help someone, I'll be late for a meeting, and then I'll be suffering. So you think that maybe your suffering is bigger than their suffering, so you don't want to help them. The near enemy of compassion is kind of tricky. It's grief. This is a kind of overwhelming grief that makes us break down, that makes us unable to help and even unable to function. And it's natural to feel a lot of grief when, for instance, someone you love dies, or you lose a job, or all kinds of things that can cause us sadness. But this kind of overwhelming grief is when we can't move on. We shut things out. We become very focused on our grief. It eats away at us for years to come, and we never can get over it because we are so sad and afraid we are paralyzed. You may have known someone who lost a child, for instance. I knew someone growing up who had lost one of her children when he was very young. And she grieved so much for this one child that the rest sort of went unnoticed by her for the rest of her lives. And many years later, she realized she had missed their childhoods and had missed her chance to mother them because she was so overwhelmed by her grief for losing the one that she couldn't take care of the others. And she felt a lot of remorse over that. So her sadness limited, again, her love and her compassion. It drew it close. It put boundaries on it so that it could only go so far. The far enemy of joy is jealousy. That's when we aren't happy when others are happy. We're jealous because they're happy and they have a happiness that we don't have. And the near enemy of it is exaltation. That's when I get so excited at my happiness that I lose my equanimity and I can't think straight. My daughter likes to watch some of those funniest shows on TV. And it seems like every week they have a video about someone who's at a birthday party or Christmas or something, and they open up a present And they're so excited, they start hopping up and down and hopping up and down, and you can just see it coming. They start hopping and they hop right into the Christmas tree and it falls over and it lands on the dog and it falls and hits grandmother on the head and the lights come down from the walls. And it's because their joy was so great that they couldn't control it and they started wrecking everything around them. So that's exaltation. So those are what the Brahma-Viharas and their enemies are. I said I was going to talk some more about them in regular life. Some of you know I was ill earlier this year, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital, about 2 weeks. So I got to see a lot of nurses at work. The nurses are someone who picks a career based on their wanting to help people. Their career choice is based on compassion. And I got to see this put into practice and see how well it was put into practice by some and not so well put into practice by others. So they're doing a very hard job, and they're on their feet for maybe 10 or 15 hours a day, and they have all kinds of things they have to remember. They have technical things they have to remember. They have data they have to remember about each patient, and a lot of hard physical labor and a lot of mental and emotional labor too. So I think they're a good example of putting compassion into effect when we have all these other things that might get in the way, because that happens to all of us. We mean to be compassionate and maybe we're not because we get upset about something else. Maybe we felt really good when we were doing the metta sutta, the metta practice, when we were chanting here at Mava, but on the way home somebody on the highway cuts us off, and that loving kindness just maybe goes out the door and we're crabby for the rest of the day. So when I was in the hospital, I saw there were pretty much 3 kinds of nurses. The first one tended to be younger and not had been doing it for very long. And they would be good, and then a patient would be in pain or would have some kind of suffering. And you could see them sort of withdraw. They would start to shut down. And they would start to kind of not pay attention to you when they saw that you were really sick or that something was really wrong. This wasn't because they didn't care. They did care. They became nurses because they cared. They're people who are very compassionate. But what happened was that being confronted with suffering and pain is painful for us. So when we see someone suffering, it makes us suffer, and that can make us pull back because we don't want to suffer. We really want to be compassionate. If being around these people who are suffering makes us suffer, we want to kind of pull back and protect ourselves somewhat. Sometimes it's also because they develop an attachment to their patients. And I talked about that a little bit. This is getting into the near enemy. They can have this grief arise because of the suffering, giving them suffering. And they can also have an attachment to their patients, and then when the patient takes a turn for the worse, it's upsetting. It's just like seeing a friend become ill, because they become attached to their patients. So they're trying to be compassionate, but fears about illness and death and suffering are stopping them. So their fears are putting a boundary on their compassion. It can only go so far. And they weren't the best nurse. Maybe if, like I said, they were all newer nurses with some more practice, they can probably get over that. The next kind of nurse was what most of the nurses were like. They were very good nurses. They had been around a lot of suffering and they'd seen people die, and so they didn't let it stop them. They knew they still had work to do, and they could still put their compassion into play and be there for their patients. So if you were in pain or you were suffering, they didn't back off. They were right there and they could help you. What bothered them was something different, though. And this is something I think I've seen in a lot of my friends or relatives who used to be nurses and had to quit after, 8 years or 10 years or 12 years. One of my nurses expressed this really well. The nurse had several patients, they all did, along with me. One of them was a woman who asked for breakfast all day long and all night long. She had some sort of senility, I don't know what kind, but she wanted breakfast all day long. 5 minutes after they fed her breakfast, she'd be yelling, "Where's my breakfast? I didn't get my breakfast." And she'd get up at 3 in the morning and go to the desk and say, "What time is breakfast?" And they'd say, "It's 3 in the morning, ma'am. It's not breakfast time now." She'd say, "Well, when is breakfast?" "You can have breakfast after 8, ma'am." She'd say, "Okay, will you tell me when breakfast is so I don't miss it?" They'd say, "Okay, ma'am, please go back to bed now." And so the nurses would deal with her asking them for breakfast over and over and over again. And then the next patient they went to, I don't know what he was in for, but I thought of him as the yelling guy because he yelled a lot. He didn't yell during the day because he seemed to sleep during the day, but he would yell all night. And so the nighttime nurses in particular, they would go to the breakfast lady, and then they would go to the yelling guy, and then they would come to me. They would come to my room, and they'd go, one nurse, the one I was talking about, she came out of his room, came into my room, shut the door, and she sat down and said, "I just need a minute. I just need a minute." And she sat there, "I just need a minute. I just need to breathe." And she sat down for about a minute very quietly, and she breathed. Then she got up, and she patted me on the arm and said, "I'm going back in. Wish me luck." And she went off. So they're under a lot of stress. But she was still compassionate. She took some time out, she went back in, and this was how most of the nurses were. The problem this nurse had with nursing was that it was something that she explained to a student nurse who was with her one night. And she was explaining to her what it was like to work in the hospital. And the nurse said, "This floor is not so bad. You feel like you are doing something here." When I first came to this hospital, they put me in oncology. And the oncology floor, of course, is where people have cancer, and most of them are dying. And she said, "I couldn't take that. No matter what I did, it didn't do any good. They're sick because they're dying, they're sick because of the medications, they throw up, you clean them up, they throw up again. You clean them up, they throw up again. You clean them up, they throw up again. Nothing I did made any difference. I couldn't take it, so I had to tell them not to put me on that floor anymore. So this floor isn't so bad because I feel like I'm making a difference." So she was getting at what I think is a big problem for all of us, in that if we don't feel like we can really make a difference, if we don't feel like we can really change things, we give up. We want to give up. We can't take that because our sense of self wants to know that I can make a difference, that I can fix this sick person, that I can keep this person from dying. And when life is the way it is, it always ends in death. It is heartbreaking and depressing to have to face the fact that you can't always make a difference. You can't always change or stop what it was you were trying to stop. You can't always heal the sick person. You can't always save the person from dying. You can't stop them from feeling pain, maybe. And this is really difficult to deal with. I used to work with someone. One time we were donating money to the Red Cross for something. I don't remember what it was. But he wouldn't donate, and somebody asked him why he wouldn't donate, and he said, "There's always another hurricane." I think it was for a hurricane. He said, "There's always another one. I used to donate, but they just keep happening." And this is sometimes called charity fatigue. Some people get tired of giving money because there's always another problem somewhere in the world. We feel like, how can I keep giving money? It doesn't seem to do any good. That's because we have trouble dealing with the fact that sometimes we can't fix things. it's hard to face that because we hope that we can fix things. We have a fear of failure. This is one of the hopes and fears that I mentioned earlier. One of our fears is that we fear failure. And when we do fail, if you're a teacher and someone flunks, or if you're doing some job and you fail at it, or if you're a nurse and you see your patient getting worse and worse and you can't do anything about it, we feel like we've failed. Even though this isn't really something that I did, our I is caught up in it. We think I failed. We have difficulty facing the fact that sometimes this is just the way the world is. Everyone that's born is going to die. Sometimes we can't fix things. And this is probably one of the hardest things we have to deal with in our lives, facing when we can't fix things. And this can make people give up careers that they love because they can't take not being able to fix someone sometimes. It's very hard to deal with that. Now the third kind of nurse, I had one of these. She had overcome that. There was a point where I was on morphine for a number of days. They told me I had to stay on it. But when it made me sick, they took me off it finally. But when I was sick with it and heaving, she stood there and she was rubbing my back and she said, "Don't worry, we'll get through this. And it'll probably happen again and we'll get through it again." So she was not bothered by the fact that it might keep happening and she might not be able to fix it. She had accepted that. She was one of the older nurses, so she had been there for a long time. Later on, when I was feeling better, I asked her, "You know, you work such a long shift, you've been here like 12 hours, and you're on your feet the whole time, and you're running back and forth and taking care of everybody. I don't know how you do it." And she said, "Well, I know I'm there for my patients. That gets me through my day. I know I can't necessarily fix things, but I can be there for them when they need me." So she had just the perfect view. She knew she couldn't fix necessarily everything, that she could still be there. She could rub your back when you were throwing up and help hold your hair out of the vomit. She could hold your hand. She could give you your medicine. She could still be there. This is the kind of person who could go to volunteer at a hospice and sit with dying people and know that they're dying and you can't stop them from dying, but you can still go there and be with them and help them by being there and offering them some comfort. So I don't think this nurse was a Buddhist, but she exemplified a lot of the Bodhisattva ideals, and that she was willing to be there for you even if it did not give her anything back. She might not get a sense of accomplishment from having fixed you or healed you. She just knew that she was there to help you through your difficulty, just to be there for you. When we take Bodhisattva vows, we vow to help all beings. The metaphor that's often used is that of a shepherd who will not leave behind even one lamb. So we care for everybody. Even if it feels like, it might not be doing any good, we still keep trying to do good things. A lot of us are going to take refuge this weekend. And when we take refuge in precepts, when we do the precepts, we take some vows to do no harm. We vow to not kill and to not steal and to not lie. We try not to hurt other people. And if we can put the 4 immeasurable minds into play, that's one of the best ways to do that. There are 2 ways to keep from hurting people. One is to have the discipline to recognize when you're doing something that's wrong. The other one is to not want to do the wrong thing in the first place, because you have the attitude of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And you have that attitude in the immeasurable kind of attitude. If you can take that into your life, you can find it much easier to avoid harming people and to do the kind of things that you want to do, to be a good person and to help people, to have that love and compassion and joy and equanimity. If you're interested in reading about the many more, Thich Nhat Hanh has written that book, and there are a number of sutras about the Brahma-Viharas, including the Brahma-Vihara Sutra, the Tabija Sutta. There are several Metta Sutras. There's the Conch-horn Sutra. They don't necessarily get talked about a lot, although we actually use them a lot. For instance, the dedication of merit that we do is the Brahma-Viharas. All beings be happy, have happiness and the causes of happiness, and all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And all beings know the great joy that is free from suffering, and may they dwell in the equanimity that is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So we do that maybe every Sunday, and we certainly do it after every retreat. In Brahma-Viharas, the four immeasurables are throughout Buddhism, even though we don't necessarily talk about them a lot. I hope I explained enough to help with that a little bit, and thank you for listening to me.